Complex technology has a way of ending up not fulfilling the needs, desires, and wants of those who originally conceived of said technology. I think the internet in general is a good example. I've been very fortunate on a few occasions to have talked to a number of gentlemen who were working on the internet way back in the day, the early 90s, where you needed a lot of tech know-how, a lot of knowledge to access it and make use of it. And their use of the internet and their appreciation of the internet, and above all their imagination of what the internet was supposed to be used for, well, let's just say that it was vastly different from the current uses. Back then, very few of these savvy tech guys thought that the primary use of the internet would be, let's be frank, for the use of prawn and to fulfill carnal desires, or maybe secondarily to agitate people, to amplify and exacerbate our primal instincts and how we interact with each other, thus forming ever more divisive tribes that don't allow us to communicate effectively and ultimately lead us to hating each other. Those guys back then, having talked to a few of them, did not envision that. And yet, arguably, you could say that that's what the internet is used for these days. For prawn and fueling the fires of antagonism between different groups of people. And that is just not something that people would have thought of back then. Instead, they thought, oh wow, we're going to spread knowledge and people are going to learn about all kinds of cool things. And they're going to use it as an encyclopedia and as a repository of all this information. It's going to be wonderful. And to be sure, some people do use the internet that way. But that's a very small minority when you look at the broader picture of the internet. This is obviously very different from more straightforward pieces of technology, like a washing machine. Now, you could be really creative and use a washing machine for things other than washing clothes, but generally speaking, the vast majority of people use a washing machine to wash clothes. Same with a microwave, etc., etc. There's one piece of technology, I think, these days that increasingly resembles the internet in its unpredictability, and we just don't know what's going to happen with it. And that is the use of AI. And it does seem like everyone and his cousin has an opinion on AI. Look, I'm a layperson. I don't have a super informed opinion on AI. I'm hardly an expert, quite the opposite. But I have seen AI being used in ways that you probably wouldn't have guessed if you had been that guy developing AI for very specific purposes. As I said, many people have made predictions about this, but what we can do is make observations about how AI is currently being used. And very specifically in this instance, you might know this, but one of the most popular Twitch streamers at the moment is an AI bot. It's basically a VTuber. In case you don't know what a VTuber is, that's essentially a person who uses an anime avatar and a rig to basically talk to the world. And people like this for all sorts of reasons. Obviously, there's the cute factor, and obviously, there's the anime factor. But normally, it's a human being behind this. In the case of this particular AI, it's called Neurosama, and it was created and programmed by a guy called Vidal987. He's the guy who's running the operation, so to speak. And this Neurosama is one of the, if not the most popular VTuber on Twitch, depending on the time of year, depending on the circumstances. But the point I'm trying to drive home here is that this is not a human being. At least, it's not a woman. Because most people associate cute anime girls with women, of course. It's an AI bot. It's not real, if you want to use that term. And more importantly, it's been programmed by a guy. And yet, you have legions of men who watch her, not really her, but its streams, interact with it, and apparently they love it. And whether or not they can actually tell the difference, and whether or not they're actually aware of the fact that this is an AI bot, ultimately doesn't seem to matter that much. I'm sure enough of them are aware that Neurosama is an AI bot. At the end of the day, that doesn't matter because they're entertained or they think it's cute or whatever. It's even more hilarious if you think about that. Ultimately, there's a man behind this, a guy who's very tech savvy, who's very, very good at programming, that programmed this AI bot to be as effective as it is. Now, I've looked at a few clips with this AI bot, and I have to admit sometimes it's funny. And I think ultimately what the key to this AI bot is that the guy who's programmed it has injected the ability to react to things in a way that men might appreciate more than you would typically find with women. So certain aspects of its humor, certain aspects of how it approaches things, that is generally how it seems to win people over or win men over. Now, I myself, I don't think, given my age and my cynicism, that I would become a regular viewer of some AI bot VTuber, let alone any VTuber. But it just goes to show how effective it is. And again, talking about predictions, something I probably shouldn't be making because predictions usually never work out and I'm too uninformed. What I can see going forward in the future is skilled programmers, coders, those who can manipulate AI very well, combining things like this with the most hyper-advanced forms of visual AI. Meaning you might get things like hyper-realistic, impossible to distinguish OF girls. They look real, the things they engage in look real, they have real voices, they speak in a normal tone, you just can't tell the difference, combined with the AI programming, meaning they seem real in terms of personality. And we already see some of this, for example. There are unironically out there, and it's not the same thing, it's a little bit more primitive, Instagram models that are run by people programming things essentially, basically at this stage just visuals, that are entirely AI, they're not real. So you see these women out and about on the town having a good time, looking insanely good, but the caveat here is that they don't exist. They don't exist at all. They are figments of your imagination, or more accurately put, figments of somebody else's imagination who is really good at feeding in prompts to an AI. And that is probably the future. That is more primitive than the combination of hyper-realistic video visuals combined with hyper-realistic tone and sound, which is then combined with actual proper artificial intelligence that's hyper-realistic and reactive. And then basically you could have untold numbers of these things being set up by probably men to bilk other men out of their money, basically. Or you could see something like this type of AI manipulating women into following trends that aren't even trends just because they're so realistic and it's impossible to tell the difference. Now, I submit to you that that probably was not a vision that the earliest developers of AI were thinking of when they were thinking about AI. They weren't thinking about social media or manipulating women into buying more clothing or tricking men into spending money on a non-existent woman who's spreading her legs for them in a non-existent fashion online. No, they probably thought of things such as this AI will help us solve complex problems, cure cancer, what have you, things of that nature. And maybe AI will be used for these goals too, but it always seems to be perfectly blunt that any time we invent as a species complex technology such as the internet, such as AI, it's always used to accommodate our most base desires, not these higher goals that people envision and imagine would be the best use of these technologies. And so this is probably just the tip of the iceberg in the sense that we're going to see a lot more of it, but in the base primitive realm as opposed to the elevated intellectual realm. And I think long term, the use of this AI technology specifically with respect to men as a means of seducing them and cajoling them into spending money is going to be amped up many, many times over. And you're going to end up with a situation where we have, as I've referred to many times, a cultural speciation event. You're going to have men who broadly, en masse, make use of this type of technology, and they're going to combine it with all kinds of things. In the early days, people would talk about blow-up dolls and that sort of thing, but imagine the technology with respect to dolls, if you will, becoming hyper-realistic, combined with hyper-realistic robotics and responsive hyper-realistic AI, and that might have seemed like science fiction even 10 years ago, but increasingly that seems like that could be a real possibility. And you're going to have men making use of this technology to satisfy their carnal needs and desires, and you're going to have other men who are going to reject it for a variety of reasons. A lot of people, for example, I've seen people in the mainstream say that that will never really become a thing in terms of men going after it because it doesn't signal status. After all, if you're spending what little money you have on AI bots and dolls and robotics or what have you, no one's going to look upon that favorably. But I think that's not entirely true. I do think it's a little bit true because part of the whole chase with women, acquiring women, and access to box is the prestige factor. Because at the end of the day, whether or not the carnal act is amazing The idea is that you can look at your list and say, oh, I got another one. Look how cool I am. It's all about status at the end of the day. Whether it comes to VTubers, visuals, or robots, that is not very prestigious. But I still think that a lot of men are going to do a cost-benefit analysis long term if these things become affordable and realistic and believable enough and say, look, I can choose between all the problems that accompany a real woman, even if you're in a position to acquire a real woman, because, let's be honest, being in a relationship with a woman is not easy. And we don't need to talk about all the reasons why it's not easy, but you probably know by now. I've been talking about it for a while. Versus an AI creation, or some combination of the things I've talked about, that produces zero stress, that gives you no problems whatsoever, and only gives you the things you need at any given moment, as opposed to all the other things, the baggage that you're saddled with when you are in a relationship with a real woman. Because at the end of the day, the truth is, as many of you already know, that one of the reasons why men put up with so much of the BS they get from women is because of box. And if you can cut past all of that and not have to deal with all the other BS, and you get the box you want, then why would you bother with the real variant with all the problems it provides and the stress, setting aside the possibility of prestige, status, and maybe reproduction in certain cases, obviously, because you need a real woman for that. And why wouldn't you go for the simpler, cheaper alternative? Something to think about. Because as I said in the beginning of this video, we just don't know how this technology will ultimately be used, but we are getting a foreshadowing now. And as seems to be the case frequently, this foreshadowing is telling us that AI technology will be used primarily to cater to our most basic primitive instincts, amplify them, exploit them, this sort of thing. Thank you for tuning in as always. Many, many deep felt thanks to my patrons on Patreon and my donors on PayPal. You guys are the best. You guys keep the channel alive. Without you, it couldn't exist. Thank you so much. And if you can hit the bell icon to be informed of my videos and do the usual YouTube jazz of liking the video, sharing the video, subbing if you're not yet a sub, much appreciated. And I will check you out next time. May the gods watch over you. If I'm still alive, I'll talk to you then. Take care. Bye-bye for now.
If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you enjoy my content, please consider making a donation or becoming a patron. Thanks for watching.